Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Tools for the Modern Man podcast. I'm your host, Pete Beskis, and this week I wanted to talk about something really personal and dear to my heart, and a topic that I always kind of bring up ad nauseum. And I think it's, growing up in a restaurant and the lessons I learned from growing up in my parents' business, and why I always think that everyone should work in a restaurant at some point in their lives. There's so many great lessons, positive and negative, that come out of working, feeding people, doing all the things that you have to do when you're a business owner, or when you're, the child of a business owner. You get to see all the stress, all of the benefits, all of the non-benefits, and how that kind of then evolves and shows up in other parts of your life. So, to start, I think the story goes, my parents used to own a pizza slash bar restaurant in the 70s and 80s in downtown Calgary. And, they serviced the after the bar crowd. All those people who come out, they're hungry and they're looking for a slice of pizza. And, they evolved their business, and they, had a bigger restaurant and everything else. And in 1977, when I was born, my mom was big and pregnant and making pizzas in the back of the restaurant. I very easily could have been born in the restaurant. And, from the earliest memories I have are of me kind of running around, dishwashers, kitchen cabinets, sharp knives, the tile floor that you get in kitchens, that red one, that brick red, that anybody who's worked in one knows what I'm talking about. The walk-in cooler. I think I spent my formative years in the back of a kitchen. Um, and I remember being a 5, 6-year-old kid running up to the bar to say goodnight to my dad, and just with, full authority and full confidence walking in going, "Leave me alone. I'm going to say goodnight to my dad." And these are things that when you're a child, a toddler, youth, you just kind of are there. That's your environment. You're sitting at the tables doing your homework, or you're, walking around bugging people, getting in everyone's way. But you get to see how people work. You get to see how things are run, and you don't appreciate it at the time because that's just your normal. But for me, it was really kind of those early years, those formative years. As I started getting older and I started to work in the restaurant, um, I started where I think everyone starts in a restaurant. I started as a dishwasher. I was probably 11, 12 years old, and I would stand at the back with the baskets of dirty dishes, and I would start, cleaning them and putting them in the dishwasher racks, putting them through the dishwasher with the industrial soap, hot plates coming out the other side, putting everything away. Now, when you're in a restaurant, things don't happen consistently. You don't work for 12 straight hours. There are rush periods, there are lulls, there are busy nights, there are dead nights, there are busy lunch rushes, and there are dead lunch rushes. And you're always adapting to the different circumstances. You're always adapting to the demand. And I remember you'd have to be rain or shine, didn't matter if it was gonna, you couldn't predict if it was gonna be a busy day or a slow day. Rain or shine, you had to be there at a certain time. You got to open the doors, you got to be ready. And that, I think, is the first lesson I learned being in, my parents' business, is you have to show up. You have to be somewhere, rain or shine. You don't get to choose which days you take off. And for any entrepreneur or person who's, say you're a career person, you're sitting in your desk at work and you're like, "Oh, I want to go be an entrepreneur and make my own time." That's a fallacy. That's BS. Like, that never creates your own schedule, right? You're always serving somebody else. So if you're an entrepreneur, and like when we opened the dental practice, you had to serve your clientele. If you didn't open the doors, you weren't going to get paid. Same thing with the restaurants. If you didn't open your doors, you don't get paid. And it doesn't matter if you're a coach, it doesn't matter if you're a consultant. If you don't show up for your client, you don't get paid. First lesson I learned, you got to open the doors. And Then as I started going through, it really was about showing up first and foremost, and then going through the motions, going through the routines. Like I was at first a dishwasher. So what did I learn from washing dishes? I learned a lot. Like a lot of people don't think that you learn anything from washing dishes, but you can always tell in a relationship the person who worked in a restaurant from the person who did not work in a restaurant. Um, and in my life, I really didn't have a lot of roommates. I didn't have a lot of people that I lived with much really until I married my wife, and got a completely different background than I do, and she's that person who never worked in a restaurant, and I'm that person who did work in a restaurant, and you can tell because I soak everything. Like if it goes into the sink, it gets soaked, and if it's not soakable, it gets rinsed right away, right? So, for example, my knives. Everyone knows that I'm obsessed about my knives and trying to keep them sharp and always looking at those newest Japanese sentokus and everything else. And I'm obsessed about them. I hate when people put them in the dishwasher. It bothers me. I don't want anyone using my knives if they're not going to treat them properly. And it's because when I was in the restaurant, you would use a knife, you'd clean a knife, you keep it sharp, and it was your tool. Like that was the tool of your trade. And when you would get it, I would rinse it, I would clean it, dry it, and put it away. Same thing with plates. It's like if you rinse something when it's wet, it doesn't dry. And if something's dry and caked on, you soak it and then it's easier to clean. And a non-restaurant person will not rinse the wet stuff and not soak the dry stuff. So it's exactly the opposite. And it drives restaurant people crazy, nuts. It drives us insane. And I dare you to ask anyone who's worked in the industry if that doesn't bother them, if that's not one of their pet peeves. And it's an adjustment period. So you see that. You're like, okay, why do I do this? Why is it such a big deal? Well, it makes life easier. You're always looking, and this is another thing I learned from being in the restaurant, is like you're looking for ways to make your life easier. You're looking for ways to be more efficient, because when you're efficient, you can get through the work faster. You can get through the work better, and you can give yourself more time to go and relax and chill out. Nobody wants to be sitting there scraping dishes for 5 hours, because guess what happens after a few hours? Another rush comes. So you're preparing yourself for that next rush. And that's what you learn. That's what I learned being a dish pig, for 10 years, 15 years. I don't think I ever escaped being a dishwasher. It was the first job I did until the day I left. It was the last job I did, was washing dishes. And I hated it at the time. I hated being 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and washing dishes at the restaurant. I felt, a lot of people would be like, oh, it's like the lowest job you can do in a restaurant. Next to cleaning bathrooms, it pretty much is. But now as I've gotten older, it's kind of my Zen place. I really like doing dishes now because I can just check out and just wash, and I can do it in literally 10 minutes, where it would take, like my wife say 30 minutes, I can do it in 10. And she always looks at me and goes, how can you do it so fast? And I'm like, I've been doing it. I got the reps in, I got the 10,000 hours in. Another thing that I learned as I went through the restaurant and I progressed through the restaurant was doing all the different jobs and seeing all the different skills you have to pick up along the way. So yes, I started as a dishwasher. And then as I grew up and I got older, I started playing with knives and fire. So natural evolution was to help my parents or, my aunt and uncle out in the kitchen. So I helped out as a short order cook. I would make the toast. I would make pizzas. I would put in the French fries. I would start doing the, chicken tenders and assembling the beef dips and picking up all of these skills on how to feed people, quality control. I took a lot of, and it was funny because I did take a lot of pride in making food. And it is a passion of mine to this very day, is making quality food for people. And it didn't matter if it was a faceless person or anything else, is that I always put attention to it. And I always made sure that it was good and that when it went out, it was a reflection on my abilities. Almost too much, maybe, like to the point where, I get very upset if I screw up a recipe. One time, I threw away a big pot of pasta because I messed it up and I was so angry I threw the entire pot into the garbage. Um, but it taught me attention to detail, taught me the quality of repetition, and that you don't do a thing well once, you do it every time. And it's not perfection. And when you're a cook or a chef, there's no such thing as perfection. Everything turns out different every single time. And it does take out that perfectionist thing that a lot of people have. When you work in a kitchen, especially if you're not on a 3-star Michelin star type place, you know, good is, good enough because you're just trying to get the food out there. You're trying to feed people. You're trying to give them the best product you can in the shortest amount of time for them, right? And you want to give them the best service. And that kind of leads you to the next phase. So, the first one was about, what lesson did I learn? Just, show up, be there. You got to open up. The next one was really about creating efficiencies. Like, what's an easy way? What are the easiest ways you can do to your job better, faster, and quicker? The third one was the attention, to producing a good product over and over and over again, right? That's what I learned from being on the line. That's what I learned from cooking in the kitchen was, you know, um, repeating the process, doing something over and over again and getting really good at it and producing a consistent product. This applies to anybody. It doesn't matter if you're a 9 to 5 or if you're an entrepreneur. Creating a consistent product is very important to your brand, to your integrity, to your reputation. And as I got older, I started moving into the front, started doing some bussing, some waitering, and then my ultimate favorite, which was bartending. And there's two different lessons you learn from being a waiter and then being a bartender. But when you're a busboy and then a waiter, you really get to see that interaction with people. Now you're moving out from being isolated in the kitchen, yelling at faceless people, getting frustrated, getting angry, and allowing your emotions to kind of rule you, to having to play a role and having to be composed and having to put a smile on and create a customer experience and, that touch point that, hey, how are you doing tonight? Those manners, those social graces, and seeing how each person in each different group have different personalities and they treat you differently and you get treated differently. And you have to maintain a standard. You have to always show up with that smile on your face. And if you allow for your frustrations to come through and anger comes through, that will reflect back on the brand, on the restaurant, on their experience. And then your reputation suffers because somebody goes out and bad talks you and somebody goes out and throws out a horrible review. So you do learn how to deal with challenging people. You do learn to have challenging conversations and overcome that so that you can move to the next table, which could be the best table of the night, could be, that next opportunity. How many waiters or waitresses stories do we have where they meet, a CEO who loves their customer service and brings them on board and gives them an opportunity to be, an intern or, has a job for them. So you never know who's watching, you never know who you're interacting with. And being in that front end really teaches you that. It also teaches you camaraderie. It teaches you how to manage the back people who are yelling at you and the front people who are yelling at you, and you're the intermediary. And some people can't handle this. I was never really that great at it, but I got better as time went on, and it gives you a bit of a thicker skin, right? It does. You need that as you get older. That's the comment a lot of people have about the generations, Z and millennials, everything else, is that they're thin-skinned. Well, if you go and work in a restaurant, I don't care which generation you're in, you will get a thick skin because you have to. Whether you like it or not, you're going to be exposed to all of these things, right? Which, again, everyone should work in a restaurant. And then finally, I went into the bar as I got older and of age, and I started bartending, and I started to see how happy people got when you gave them what they wanted ahead of time. So what you see in a bar versus in a restaurant is regular. You see regulars a lot more in a bar setting than you do in a restaurant setting. So you'll see a regular come in after work for his happy hour drink. You start to know what they want to drink. You start to prepare a cold glass. You go a little bit extra, and you start to build some real relationships with the people that are coming, and you get to know about them, and you get to ask questions. And, for time immemorial, the bartender has been the therapist for most men. That's where they're telling their stories about their job, about their frustration, about their wives, about their kids, about their husbands, about their dating life, loss. You see the entire spectrum of human emotion when you're tending bar. And you get to see people at their best and you get to see them at their absolute worst. If you can go through multiple years as a bartender and still have empathy for human beings, you are now ready. You are now at a master class of leadership, and that's all you really need. And I love to teach on leadership. A lot of my fundamentals I learned as I reflect back on this arc of going through, my restaurant experience. And at the end, and the final step was really managing and closing up and being responsible. And as a young adult, when I was 21, 22, and my parents and my aunt and uncle put this responsibility to myself to close up shop, to go open up shop, give them that freedom that they could go and, take more time off. That responsibility was amazing. It was an amazing feeling for me to know that I had garnered their trust to be able to lead this team. And at 20, 21 years old, I was the leader of that restaurant when my parents weren't there and when my aunt and uncle were there, and I took that responsibility very seriously. And that is the work ethic and that entrepreneurial spirit that I then carried with me and carry with me to this very day. Every single time I have a touch point with anybody that I'm interacting and working with, it's just show up. Showing up is one of the most important things. Being efficient, being, looking for better ways of doing something, about creating consistent product over and over again, right? So people can depend on you, they can rely on you. It's about managing hard conversations and difficult personalities. How do you communicate? Learning to communicate with completely different people, right, across the board. Empathy, asking questions, listening, those are all skills. And then ultimately the responsibility of leading other people through the same skill sets. These are all amazing, amazing things I learned by growing up in a restaurant. And they weren't all fun. I would say a lot of the times I would bitch and complain about having to go in. But when I reflect back and I look at the foundation that it gave me and the foundation that set me up on, it's hard for me to say that it wasn't anything but good. And I always fondly look back at those memories of, the family lunch in between lunch and dinner, drinking coffee and just hanging out and, goofing around and playing cards or playing backgammon, when you're in a downtime. And the feeling after a rush when you're tired, but good tired. All of those things that I think we take for granted when we're in it and we don't appreciate it when we're in it, but it really builds that foundation. So that's my experience for you. I highly recommend everybody send your children into a restaurant to go work for a few years. Hell, I'm thinking about opening one anyway, just so I can put my kids in one and have them learn, open a pizza shop down here off the PCH. But, for those of you who have felt that experience like I have, we can commiserate. For those of you who have no clue what I'm talking about, well, I think you missed out a little bit. So to everybody, have a great week, and we will talk next time on Tools for the Modern Man.